On a December evening in 2002, a suburban home on the edge of Modesto, California seemed peaceful. But inside, the quiet held a secret. The woman who answered to the name Laci Peterson, 8 months pregnant with her first child, vanished from the couple's rented house. Her husband, Scott Peterson, reported her missing. A few weeks later, the remains of Laci and her unborn son would be found in the waters of San Francisco Bay. What began as a missing persons case quickly transformed into one of the most publicized, emotionally charged homicide investigations in modern American history. Hopes, grief, media frenzy, legal battles. Every layer of this story challenges us to ask, how well do we really know the person next to us? This is the story of the Peterson case, told in full. Laci Denise Rocha was born in 1975, raised in a modest family with strong roots in the San Diego area. She was described by friends as joyful, ambitious, a loving partner, and excited for the future. Scott Lee Peterson, born 1972, was raised in the Bay Area. A construction supervisor, athletic, active outdoors. He and Laci met, fell in love, and in 2002 they moved to Modesto, where they rented a home, anticipating their baby boy, whom they planned to name Connor. On the surface, the stage was set for the kind of happily ever after story many people hope for. Friends spoke of weekend barbecues, beach trips, baby showers. But underneath the calm were undercurrents. Scott's frequent offshore fishing trips, his burgeoning friendships separate from Laci, and subtle tensions. In the weeks before Laci's disappearance, neighbors noticed Scott leaving early for fishing, staying late. Laci was seen hosting friends, laughing with anticipation, and then, on December 24, 2002, Laci vanished. Christmas Eve. Scott Peterson calls 911, reports he returned from a fishing trip to find his wife missing. He tells police Laci was last seen the evening before at the couple's home around 9 p.m. The baby shower had taken place earlier in the month. The nursery was ready. Police begin a missing person investigation. As days pass, concerns mount. Scott's behavior raises questions. His fishing trip becomes scrutinized. His comments on live TV interviews shift under pressure. On April 13, 2003, human remains are found in San Francisco Bay. A skull, later identified as Laci's. The belt from her maternity pants. Her unborn son's remains found separately. The timeline becomes a homicide. The community of Modesto, once calm, erupts with shock. TV vans gather in front of the Peterson house. Friends and family of Laci mourn while questions swirl about Scott's story. The narrative had shifted. No longer just a missing wife, but possibly a murder case. Detectives dig into Scott's fishing trip. Where was he? Who did he see? What was the boat? They trace his offshore route. They study the time window. When Laci last seen, when Scott left, when he returned, when remains discovered. The prosecution's case would later emphasize Scott had motive, escape his life of obligations, new romantic interests, opportunity, fishing trip, bay access, and behavior, inconsistent statements. The defense countered, no direct eyewitness, no crime scene in the home, case built largely on circumstantial evidence. Key pieces in the case. The unborn son's remains found in the bay, indicating disposal of 2 bodies. Laci's maternity belt found in the bay full of barnacles, indicating submersion. Scott's alleged affair with another woman created motive. Scott's offshore fishing at the exact time of disappearance lent to opportunity. The media coverage was relentless. Local and national news amplified every development. Friends of Laci pleading for her return. Theories erupting on talk shows. Scott's interviews criticized for seeming detached. The court of public opinion formed early. Investigators uncovered text messages, phone records, bank records. They built a timeline of Scott's movements. Early December 23rd, dinner at home with Laci. Scott leaves on his boat December 24th. Laci is gone by morning. They attempted to link the fishing trip to disposal of bodies in the bay. With mounting pressure, the police and the district attorney prepared for a homicide charge. Though there was no body recovered on land, no blood evidence in the home, prosecutors relied on the pattern of behavior, forensic clues from the bay, and Scott's alleged motive. On June 2, 2004, Scott Peterson was indicted on 2 counts: first-degree murder of Laci and second-degree murder of unborn Connor. The trial began January 12, 2004 in Redwood City. The prosecution delivered its case with emotional weight, painting Scott as a man who had betrayed his pregnant wife, dumped her body in the bay, and moved on. The defense counter-ed. Lack of direct physical evidence inside the home, no witness to the murder, no definitive forensic link between Scott and the remains of Laci. They argued the case was built on inference, speculation, and media-driven bias. Over the months, the jury heard dramatic testimony. Friends of Laci, the diving team retrieving the belt, forensic experts analyzing barnacles, phone records showing Scott's late December fishing trip. At one point, the judge rejected a defense motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence. On November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder of Laci and second-degree murder of Connor. He was sentenced to death in March 2005. Since then, he has been awaiting the execution of the sentence in San Quentin State Prison. The case became a media spectacle. Years later, in 2020, California's Supreme Court overturned the death sentence on procedural grounds. In 2021, Scott's sentence was changed to life without possibility of parole. The legal journey continues, with appeals, new evidence requests, and persistent public interest. Meanwhile, Laci's family established a foundation in her honor, and Modesto remains marked by the tragedy. The case raised major questions about how homicide investigations proceed when the murder scene is the open water, when evidence is circumstantial, and when media plays a dominant role. As this case fades from headline news, its echoes remain strong. The Peterson case reminds us that even when a jury convicts, many questions linger. Was there ever direct forensic proof tying Scott to the act of killing? Could an alternate scenario explain the disappearance and death? How much did the intense media coverage influence jury perception? Critics argue the case was built more on narrative than physical proof, while proponents assert the circumstantial mosaic sufficed for justice. Outside court, some investigators still believe there are unanswered pieces. Whether others were involved, whether some forensic evidence was properly handled, whether the disposal in the bay was as clean as claimed. For the community of Modesto, the grief remains personal. The memory of Laci, unborn Connor, and the shock of realizing that a loving family could become a crime scene. For viewers, the case invites deeper reflection. What does justice mean when evidence is circumstantial? How much do we trust what we see in the media? And when the murder scene is the wide open sea, can the truth ever truly be brought to land? Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, consider exploring further the complexities of this case, the court transcripts, the appeals, the forensic details, because sometimes the story that ends in a verdict is only the beginning of what we don't yet understand.